Well, the FDA has approved the first COVID vaccine. Does this mean it's safe? Of course not. Does this mean it wasn't rushed? Of course not. This is a vaccine that has been one of the most poorly tested vaccines ever approved by the FDA, and with the most side effects of any group of vaccines ever be approved by the FDA in a process that can only be described as extraordinarily rushed. But what does this mean for us? Well, it means we're going to see a huge increase in vaccine mandates coming from governments, coming from private entities. It's going to be a setback in litigation. It's going to be a setback in every type of resistance. So let's talk about it, guys. Here's the letter from the FDA approving the vaccine for Pfizer. It says BioNTech, but that's just a part of Pfizer issuing the approval, subject to, of course, they have all of these tests that are not completed and have final reports due years into the future on whether or not they're safe with respect to heart conditions. So you can see there's all of these studies they're still conducting. Some of them, the protocols haven't even been submitted yet, and the final reports aren't going to be due for years and years to come. And this is all linked to myocarditis and pericarditis. That's heart inflammations caused by the vaccine. So those are even being talked about right there. And of course, if you've been following the vaccine science, you know that there's been a lot of issues with the side effects that have been documented. And actually, some of these were really well put in a lawsuit we covered the other day against Rutgers University, where they made the following points. COVID vaccines skipped testing for genotoxicity, mutagenicity, pterogenicity, and oncogenicity. In other words, it is unknown whether or not the vaccines will change human genetic material, cause birth defects, reduce fertility, or cause cancer. Of course, it's too soon for them to know this stuff. It's only been rushed to the market, Operation Warp Speed, and foisted upon the public in an extremely rash manner that is absolutely out of character for the FDA. This Rutgers suit continues to point out COVID vaccines are considered gene-based vaccines or vaccines produced from gene therapy molecular platforms whose safety and efficacy has not been fully assessed. This is unlike all other vaccines where there is a set amount of antigen or a live attenuated virus in the vaccine. Additionally, 2 of these COVID vaccines involve a radical new technology never approved by the FDA for medical use and never administered to healthy human beings before. The risks of taking these mRNA emergency vaccines are not well known or fully understood. These vaccines were only tested on human subjects for 6 months before being released to the public. There is absolutely no knowledge whatsoever of the long-term efficacy or long-term safety of these vaccines. So that's where things are now. Just because the FDA approves something doesn't mean it's safe. Here's an interesting article that came out actually back in 2014, so it's not even current. There's probably more drugs you can add to the list of FDA approved prescription drugs that were later pulled from the market because the risks they found actually outweighed their benefits. And some of these drugs may be familiar to you, but there's lots of them. They've had all kinds of serious side effects, from addiction. This is Darvon, it's an opioid, to birth defects, all kinds of different things. Some of these drugs may be new to you. Some of them may be more familiar. We've got, where is it? Here we've got, here you go, Quaaludes. There you go. Sedative and hypnotic that was caused for recall due to mania, seizures, vomiting, convulsions, and death. So just because the FDA approves something doesn't mean it's safe. But the reality is this is going to be used against the lawsuits. It's going to be used against everybody who's resisting the vaccine. The media establishment, the political establishment, the bureaucracies are all going to say, FDA says it's safe, and that just makes it safe automatically, ignoring, of course, all of the evidence to the contrary. So what does this mean for us? Well, obviously, in the litigation space, we can just hope the lawsuits continue, and we'll and hope they go forward. It's going to be a setback, but that's just the way it is. We've looked at some of these cases in previous videos, and they seem quite solid to me, but obviously I am not the judge, and judges tend to actually subordinate their job of interpreting the law and applying the facts to the law for what's politically expedient, and all we can do is keep on pushing forward with those. But in the legislative space, I want to talk about that because there is legislation in Michigan to prevent vaccine passports from being issued by the government, and some other things too. So if you look at, you can go to michiganvotes.org. If you just put in vaccine for the search term, you'll find several bills, although one of them got left out because in the description it didn't say vaccine, it said shot. But here we've got Senate Bill 600. This was introduced only a month ago by Senator Tice, and it's basically obsolete now because it just says that it would prohibit schools from requiring students to take a vaccine under emergency use authorization. Well, now at least one vaccine has passed into general authorization, and the other one is likely to follow. So this bill is unfortunately no longer going to do anything. That's just the way that goes. But there are other bills. One of the big ones is going to be Senate Bill 4660 or House Bill 4667. It has passed the House. It is in the Senate now. It's to prohibit a government entity from requiring a vaccine passport, essentially. So here's the bill. Prohibit the state or local governments from producing, issuing, or entering contracts to produce or issue a COVID-19 vaccine passport. Would also ban governments from providing an incentive for a person to require or use a vaccine passport. Passed the House. So we've got a roll call vote in the House. That is critical. It tells us who's on which side. Every Republican voted in favor of it, and 4 Democrats joined in as well. All of the other Democrats voted no. So there you go. And you can see that puts them on record on where they are about this. So we need to push this bill as hard as we can through the Senate. Would the governor veto it? Of course she would, but make her veto it, make her position official, and equally importantly, make sure every state senator is also on record on this as well. But there's also another bill, and I would say equally important, and that is House Bill 4471, banning private employers from mandating their employees to get COVID or other, they say shots, which is a euphemism for a drug that would be required as a condition of employment. And of course, we're seeing this happening everywhere now, where employers, especially public entities, but now private entities too, are starting to demand that their employees get vaccinated as a condition of employment. Unfortunately, some people on the right would be in favor of allowing this, and they make this kind of flimsy free market argument that the free market is going to sort this all out. And it's just too bad in the meantime for all of the casualties who will lose their jobs, because when they got their jobs, they had no idea their employers would ever even consider mandating they take a drug that they don't need and don't want, and that has serious side effects as a condition of their employment. So I would make a few responses to that, and we're going to be talking about this. Rescue Mission is going to be launching an effort in the coming days to push these bills and get every politician in Lansing and everyone running for office on record where they stand on these issues. And we're going to lay out some of the arguments. So actually, some of them come from a really great suit that was just recently filed in federal court in New Mexico. And actually, this was a case where a class of individuals are suing the state of New Mexico for imposing vaccination rules on employees. But the arguments they make clearly would also apply to private entities as well. So some of the things that they say is that the plaintiffs in this lawsuit have a liberty interest in engaging in their chosen profession. Requiring an individual to take a controversial, poorly tested, radical new medical treatment as a condition of employment most certainly runs afoul of the Constitution's Due Process Clause protections by depriving those asserting their medical rights of their ability to earn a livelihood in the occupation of their choosing. And of course, depending on your occupation, many of these, if you lose the job at the company that you're in, you're unlikely to be able to get hired anywhere else. So effectively, an employer mandate is a bar to your employment in the industry. So the lawsuit goes on. For example, the United States Supreme Court in Berry versus Barkey opined as to the constitutionally protected property interest in engaging in one's chosen profession of horse racing. And it's interesting that horse racing is a topic because horse racing is a very narrow profession, but certainly would apply even more to more common broad professions. Stating, quote, plaintiffs have a liberty interest in pursuing their profession of horse racing and are entitled to due process of law if they are to be lawfully denied an opportunity to do so. That was a 1979 case. Thus, the right of citizens to support themselves by engaging in a chosen occupation is deeply rooted in our nation's legal and cultural history and has long been recognized as a component of the liberties protected by the 14th Amendment. Over a century ago, the Supreme Court recognized that, quote, It requires no argument to show that the right to work for a personal living in the common occupations of the community is of the very essence of the personal freedom and opportunity that was the purpose of the 14th Amendment to secure. That's Truax versus Reich. I don't know if I'm pronouncing those names correctly. This was a case holding that a state anti-alien labor statute violated both equal protection and due process, but the principle is there. Later, in striking down a law banning the teaching of foreign languages in school, the Supreme Court observed that the 14th Amendment guaranteed the right to engage in any of the common occupations of life. Meyer v. Nebraska. Despite later jurisprudence following the Lochner era, de-emphasizing economic substantive due process, our Supreme Court has never repudiated the recognition that a citizen has the right to work for a living and pursue his or her chosen occupation. So they go on to note that the Third Circuit has recognized that the right to hold a specific private employment and follow a chosen profession free from unreasonable governmental interference comes within both the liberty and property concepts of the 5th and 14th Amendments. However, the Constitution only protects this liberty from state actions that threaten to deprive persons of state actions that threaten to deprive persons of their right to pursue their chosen occupations. State actions that exclude a person from one particular job are not actionable, brought directly under the Due Process Clause. It is the liberty to pursue a calling or occupation, not the right to a specific job secured by the 14th Amendment. So, as they say, there is no question that the 14th Amendment recognizes a liberty interest in citizens to pursue their chosen occupation. The dispositive question is whether or not such a right exists, but rather the level of infringement upon that right that may be tolerated. So the question that's going to be coming up in litigation is, to what extent is private and public entities imposing vaccine mandates preventing people from pursuing jobs in their chosen fields of employment? And that might be a very strong argument, because I think what we're going to see happening at a very rapid pace is huge numbers of large corporations cracking down on this and essentially prohibiting anyone who from seeking a job in that industry. And as the Supreme Court has said over and over again, contrary to the free market argument here, it's not enough to say, oh, just get a different line of work. No, you are entitled to pursue and obtain a job in your chosen profession. There's actually another quote in a footnote here. This is from a dissenting opinion, but nonetheless a very important point. The right to work, I had assumed, was the most precious liberty that man possesses. Man has indeed as much right to work as he has to live, to be free, to own property. The American ideal was stated by Emerson in his essay on politics. A man has a right to be employed, to be trusted, to be loved, to be revered. It does many men little good to stay alive and free and propertied if they cannot work. To work means to eat. It also means to live. For many, it would be better to work in jail than to sit idle on the curb. The great values of freedom are in the opportunities afforded man to press on to new horizons, to pit his strength against the forces of nature, to match skills with his fellow man. Barsky v. Board of Regents of University of State of New York. So these are excellent legal arguments, and these are arguments as to why it's so important that we continue to assert our right to our own personal freedom and to our right to hold a job in our chosen occupation. So in the coming days, we're going to be talking about pursuing legislation, promoting it, getting a roll call vote on it, getting our politicians on record on it. The bill that we just talked about, that's Representative Sue Aller's bill 4471, is in the Commerce and Tourism Committee in the State House. You can see the members there. One of the Democrat members, Karen Whitsitt, is a co-sponsor of the bill. So that's good. But it's going to be a question of whether or not the other members of the committee are going to move it forward. And of course, the committee chair is going to be important as well. And that kind of pressure might come not just to the committee chair, but also to leadership, because this is a fundamental issue of whether or not the American people are going to be de facto forced to take a vaccine by the coercion coming from the quote unquote free market. So stay tuned for that. The emphasis is going to be on getting politicians on record and holding them accountable if they are opposing liberty, because that's what Rescue Michigan is all about. So thank you all for watching. Thanks for all you do for liberty. And until next time, peace.